You know, what you have, what's odd to me is we have two nationalists facing off against each other in the media, Putin versus Zelensky. But Zelensky is portrayed as a hero and Putin is portrayed as Hitler. But in fact, Zelensky is actually projecting a very strong nationalist image to the world, which the left seems to embrace while rejecting it in America and rejecting it in Russia and everywhere else.
Well, they're embracing something that they want to use as a bludgeoning instrument against Russia. The Ukrainians are just being manipulated in all of this. Their interests are of no concern whatsoever to the people driving this train, just as the interests of most Americans are treated with contempt. These people have a completely different view of the world, and they are determined to globalize it. The Ukrainians are just the latest instrument in their arsenal that they're trying to use to defame and destroy Russia. I wish the Ukrainians understood that, but they do not.
Colonel, U.S. Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland, who goes back to the Obama era, confirmed in a congressional hearing just Tuesday that biological research facilities were in Ukraine and feared that Russia could take control. Now they're saying in the media, that's what got me very angry this morning, that Russia's about to use biological weapons and say that the Ukrainians did it. It seems like I'm watching an alternate reality here of propaganda going in circles. So Nuland says that Ukraine has biological research facilities. Now we're hearing Russia is going to use that as a pretext to use chemical weapons on the Ukrainians. Can you give us some clarity on this issue?
I think the whole idea is utter nonsense, complete insanity. Putin, if you view him as just a Russian, as an Eastern Slav, is not interested in killing large numbers of other Eastern Slavs who are also Orthodox Christians or otherwise. It's not his intent. If anything, he would like to include certainly the Russian-speaking Eastern Slavs and Eastern Ukraine inside this larger Russian construct, because he's got a population whose birth rate has fallen. He's had to effectively slow down, if not stop, the brain drain out of Russia, because people want to seek opportunities elsewhere in order to enrich themselves, but also to live a more fulfilling life. These are the people that have the most to offer, the human capital that he needs inside Russia. He's got a completely different approach. So the notion that he's going to try and mass murder or exterminate these people is, I think, ludicrous nonsense. Now, as far as the biolabs are concerned, I don't know the details. I've looked at a lot of material. And I do find it interesting that Victoria Nuland was in the forefront of speaking about this. It's almost as though someone who stole a car wants to get on television and say, look, I didn't steal a car. I'm not a thief. I'm not a crook.
It sounds like a fifth grade tactic, because the more she says I know nothing about it, the more we know she knows a lot about it. Colonel, I have to ask you about a few things in your background that are so interesting to me. Your leadership in the Battle of 73 Easting, the U.S. Army's largest tank battle since World War II. I'd love to get into that in a minute. But before we do, I read today in the Stanford Advocate that the narrative we are hearing in America, the only narrative that we see in the media at all, is not the same as the narrative that is seen outside the West, where Putin is less isolated than you might think. And I just learned, truthfully, in studying this today, that India, under Modi, has refrained from denouncing the Russian invasion. Brazilian President Bolsonaro said his nation will not take sides in the conflict. And he even dismissed Ukrainian leader Zelensky as a comedian. A senior South African official still calls Russia a friend through and through. So the whole world is not against Russian President Putin as the Russians lay siege to Ukrainian cities. The world outside is not 100% behind the view of the mainstream media.
No, it isn't. And the countries that you mentioned, most of them fall into this thing we call the BRICS, or the BRIC. These are nations that are stepping out, if you will, of the financial system, because the financial system has been weaponized against them. Remember, the SWIFT system is something we created, and we use it as a weapon against anyone we don't like.
What is the SWIFT system? It's a money transfer system, like a bank wiring system?
It's more than that. It's transfer payments between nations for commodities and goods. And if you can't use it, you are potentially in serious trouble. Now, nations have, because it's all dollar-based. But remember that nations are already trading today in other than dollars. Right now, trade between Japan and China, which has picked up enormously, is all in their currency. They've agreed to trade with each other in their currency, not using dollars. This is why you hear people periodically stand up and say, we're putting the dollar's reserve position at risk, which is not really in our interest. We would like to stay the dollar reserve. But we're doing stupid things that are driving people away from us. And even in Europe, the German chancellor, who I think is not a bad human being, but is trying, as so many politicians do, to stay on all sides of the issue, has said, I'm going to continue to pay for Russian energy. I'm sorry. 80% of my energy comes from Russia through Ukraine to Germany. I'm not going to cut it off. I can't. He knows he can't. He'd have hundreds of thousands of Germans in the street protesting and potentially rioting because they wouldn't have any energy. He's not the only one. Hungary falls into that particular category. I doubt seriously the Greeks are very enthusiastic about what we're doing. We really stand an excellent chance of killing this thing called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
The opposite of what we're hearing.
Definitely.
The media says that now NATO is more unified than ever before. You disagree, apparently. We'll be right back with more from this incredible conversation with Colonel Douglas Macgregor.